Hi, before we start, I just want to say that as you can tell, today's video is going to be pretty darn long because it turns out I have a lot of things to say about it. So, this video series has always been intended to be something you put in the background and then you just kind of like hear. So please do that. Don't stare at the screen. Okay, bye. Hello, it's a rather still Monday afternoon where I am, which is quite appropriate for what we're going to talk about today. Welcome to the Library of Alexander, and here is what I'm thinking about. Why you should never give 100%. So most large structures and buildings today, they're not monolithic by any measure. They're not singular and fused and complete and rigid and unmoving. No, they are more of somewhat rigid, solid assemblies of several items bound together by expansion joints that makes way for thermal expansion, shaking, or the wind, right? If you would think of bridges, right, they're not a singular slab of concrete placed across water. Rather, they are sections that are connected by joints that allow them to wiggle and expand and move in response to wind, waves, earthquakes if you have them, and the diurnal changes in temperature. And that makes sense, because if they were a solid piece, they'd be cracking all the time, and before the implementation of expansion joints or movement joints, this was very commonplace, and you still will see this now on, for example, roads. If the slab of asphalt is singular, you'll have natural cracking as you go past it. You have the larger temperature changes across the seasons and so on and so forth. So why I brought this up? Well, one, I'm an engineer. Two, why I thought about this is because recently I thought about joining the university that I'm at, their symphonic band. So I used to be a tubist, and I've been having this itch to play and make use of my skills again. It also happened that there was a nice confluence of circumstances. They had a singular tubist, which seems to be like a common curse amongst symphonic bands. There's never enough tubas. So they would appreciate someone with my skill set. And it was also kind of music that I was already familiar with, so certainly the pickup will be faster for me to pick up whatever they're doing. And at the same time, they're also preparing for a competition. So having a second tuba for what is essentially a very inspiring and very inspiring and uplifting piece of music would certainly add to their performance. So they were preparing for this competition, and of course I knew what that meant because I had competed before, and that meant you would have to sink a lot of time into doing this. So I went back and I thought about it, and I looked at my schedule, and I thought to myself, like, wow, wouldn't I be up to my neck with all these practices, right? What about the other things I want to do? What if something else comes along and I want to capitalize on it? So it's been stewing in the back of my head, and I was sitting in a bus one day and suddenly realized, actually, you really shouldn't give your 100%. So yeah, that's the idea that we're talking about today. I'll go through a few examples of where this has appeared and where they've appeared in like my readings and whatnot. So recently, I'm subscribed to this blog called Farnham Street. They talk about mental models and how to think well and by extension live well. So there was a linked interview, Marc Andreessen's interview with Sriram Krishnan. So Andreessen's the co-founder of Andreessen Horowitz, or A16Z. They are a venture capital firm, and I think they do more of the cutting edge stuff, try to bring cool things to life. And there was a section where he was talking about his schedule and how he has a regimented schedule, and how that contrasted from what he, Andreessen, was doing back when he was programming. And he talked about, I think the first person he mentioned was Arnold Schwarzenegger, where he said something to the effect of Arnold Schwarzenegger having an open calendar and the upside of an unstructured time, and the kind of flexibility you get if you don't have a schedule. And that works for people who are perhaps in an entrepreneurial mode, or who have less things that how do I put this? They have one singular overwhelming commitment that they just have to service in particular. But if you're responsible to a lot of people and you have to get back on time, you have to meet people for different things and address different issues at once, and you're essentially playing several games of chess at once in a way, then this is where Marc Andreessen talks about like needing that calendar so that everyone gets their due time of day, and it also keeps your life in order because you have all these inputs coming in at once. So yeah, I think I'm going to go with a quote. He says something to the effect of, if part of your job is to deal with a large amount of incoming data, or information, you actually need to respond in a timely manner and not let people down. Right? Some people can do that off the cuff. I don't know how to do that. And this is where the value of structure and scheduling comes in, right? And one thing I realized from his schedule is that there are very clear sections where it's just like break, where he doesn't do anything. And it made me think about like, oh, actually, there's someone in my life who already does something like that. I have a particularly wise and intelligent friend who makes it a point to never be operating at full capacity. He always makes time for relaxation, which in his case is drinks with people or going out for good food. I asked him about it before, and he says, you always need capacity. You need extra capacity if you want to snag opportunities, right? And now that I think about it, now that I'm a bit wiser and older and having mulled on what he said for a couple of years now, it makes a lot of sense, right? Because opportunities aren't rare by any measure, but the ones that matter, you want to be able to pick them up when they appear, right? And the only way you can do that is if your plate isn't full. If your plate's full already, you're going to have to drop something, and that's a problem, right? Because when you start filling up your schedule, it eventually becomes a commitment, a responsibility that you have to service frequently and on time. So you can't just drop the ball that way, right? And if you can drop the ball, you should have dropped it a long time ago, because then it's obviously something that's not sort of mission critical for you to do. So that's why having the extra capacity and not operating at 100% makes a lot of sense, right? If your schedule is full, then you're not going to be able to fit anything in without compromising the rest. And when I mean the rest, I also mean rest in the sense of like relaxation, mental well-being, and sleep. I cannot stress enough, right? If you're eating up sleep, thinking that you'll be more productive, you're actually fighting a losing battle, because you're trying to be more productive on what is essentially less fuel for your brain, right? And it's not that sleep isn't productive. When you're sleeping, right, apart from the fact that you're letting your brain, sort of tend to its wounds from the course of the day to get rid of the exhaustion, there's also the underlying subconscious churning of ideas, and that's where your ideas start coming to you in dreams if you're thinking about them all day. I recently read this book called Peak. Let me check who it's by. I believe it's K. Anders Ericsson and Robert Poole. So Ericsson is a psychologist, Poole is a science writer, but in Peak, one of the things one of the ideas they talked about was that the people who operate at the highest levels, who are experts, they actually get more sleep than their peers who are slightly less competent than they are. And the reason for that partially is because, one is that they focus so hard in the day, so they have no choice but to sleep more, otherwise they can't work. Two is that ideas come to them when they sleep, because their whole day they're just thinking about that particular set of ideas, right? And there's always this idea. I think there's one line in Descartes. Oh my gosh, what was that work by Descartes? But anyway, he said it came to me in a dream for some sort of explanation, which I think is intellectually really lazy. But back to it, my point is that sleep in itself is also required for effective, high quality work. So all of this, right, your schedule can't be packed to the brim, because once you start eating out of one thing, the entire structure might collapse, right? You may fall back on your duties for one thing, which means you need to catch up on that, and it pushes the other, and it snowballs and it cascades, and the whole thing goes to whack. If you have that, essentially your schedule's expansion joint, right? That particular section of flexibility, you're going to be able to accommodate new opportunities which might be more important to you in the long run. Of course, I cannot stress enough when you try to think like, oh, but I gotta be busy, I gotta be productive. You're not so interested in being productive insofar, but rather you're interested in the idea of productivity, the impression of busyness, right? There seems to be this cult worship of busyness nowadays, that you have to be busy all the time or you have to feel guilty about it, compared to these other people who are so productive in their own way. But if you think about what they do, if you think about what they actually put out, some of them are truly, truly extraordinary people, yes, who are putting out tons upon tons of work, right? But a lot of other people, it's really just performative. It's Clifford Geertz's idea of like social interaction as performance. So that's just kind of dumb, right? Don't you think? You keep saying that you want to be productive, but at the end of the day, you just want to look productive. The reputation is more important than the actual product, right? And more importantly, like, okay, we can talk about the merits of reputation against like your actual, right? Because if you have no reputation but you work really hard, then people are not going to recognize the value of what you do, and you don't really get the opportunities. Sure, but that reputation is a false one. It's built on the fact that you look busy, but not that you actually are producing a lot of things, right? That's the reputation that you're chasing. It's essentially just an imitation, a cheap knockoff of that which you actually desire. And if you really, really wanted to push yourself to the absolute brink, I think David Goggin's 40% rule really comes into play here. The point that you think that you are done is actually a point that you're only 40% done. If you're really going for 100%, if you're really pushing yourself to the absolute max, you can achieve levels of productivity that are otherwise impossible. But it comes at immense physical, psychological, mental, spiritual sacrifice. And these things, I'm sure you've done it before, like when you pull all-nighters for a project, you achieve levels of productivity that are unthinkable for your average, day in your life. But it also comes at immense sacrifice, because at the end of it, you're going to crash for 72 hours straight, or you'll be mentally dysfunctional for the next week, or you'll be slowly trying to pay off that sleep debt, which you can't really pay off so easily because now you're going to play catch up on everything else. Yeah, so you shouldn't be desiring that so-called 100% completion, full clear status if it's purely performative. If you're loading yourself up on things that make you look busy, then you're not actually busy, you're not actually being productive. So don't try to pretend to be 100%, right? It's fine to have sections that are empty so that you can I know it sounds a bit counterintuitive, but you can learn, right? If you have time to go and learn something else, you actually end up being more productive because you add more skill sets. And at the same time, if you're playing, right, it puts you in a different kind of state. So you're actually injecting chaos and new ideas and fresh ideas into your subconscious, which help you process your work. All right, let me take you through what I'm talking about in a slightly clearer manner. It's pretty clear to me because I've already thought about it, but I realize that as I say it seems rather messy. So back to the start. I mentioned that in peak, there's the idea of, ideas coming to you in dreams. If you focus a lot, right? You also need your sections of play and rest so that your brain can quietly churn and work and think about new ideas. And if you're working in a field that is centered on knowledge and creating new solutions or new ideas, then certainly this is really important, right? You need that rest time to let your brain do the underlying churning. Now, how do you get this to be a little bit better? This is something that's more of a personal idea, that a sort of a personal strategy that I'm currently using, and it seems to work. Okay, But to make that process better, you have to inject chaos. So just hold on to the idea of injecting chaos first, right? You inject chaos into that system, your brain churns a little bit more. It's like adding new ingredients into a recipe, and it gives you the opportunity to come up with something new and something valuable and something worthwhile. Now, how do you inject chaos? If you think about Cloudflare is a company that does, I believe, internet hosting or domain hosting. Like, not very familiar with this field. One thing they do to improve their encryption is they use lava lamps. They put a camera, that is pointed at an array of lava lamps on their wall, and because of how genuinely random the motion of these lava lamp globules are, they take that, turn it into an actually random seed, and use it for their encryption, which makes their encryption a lot more trustworthy, a lot stronger, a lot more stable in the face of attacks. Now, what is your lava lamp? For people, it depends on what they're doing during their rest time. For me, I use Dota. Dota is, for those who are not familiar, is a game that was originally a mod for Warcraft. Now it's Dota 2, owned by Valve, the guys behind Steam. Yeah. Still Ice Rock running the game, but it's usually played in a sort of like about a 1 hour format, 5v5, and you duke it out on a battlefield trying to achieve certain objectives, which is ultimately the defense of an ancient, some sort of, essentially a building of some kind that you have to defend. So why I use it as my chaos injector is because so you have 100 different heroes, you have 5 on each side, the number of possible iterations, versions of each game that you can play. Even though it's exactly the same game, the amount of variation that's injected because there's so many options of what your opponent's lineup will be, what your lineup will be, what items you buy to enable, what strategies you will take, all of this, it creates a lot of chaos. And for me, when I inevitably die in game and wait to respawn, right, all that injects certain ideas, right? Do I pick a path of aggression, taking a hero that is strong early and I just try to press my advantage as much as I can? Or do I sit back, wait, consider, maybe I try to be a little bit sly, a bit sneaky, pop out, pick off a few people, assassinate some people here and there, right? All of these inject a sort of conceptual chaos into my head. And when I die, I just kind of stare at the screen and I think, and sometimes ideas come to me, and I've been using this for this project that I just submitted today, and it seems to be pretty useful. So it was a project where I had to design an analog component, and I just kind of, at some point you just kind of have no idea how you're going to approach the problem, because you're just tweaking numbers at random, and you're hoping things will work, right? You think, okay, maybe I'll use a slightly larger transistor here, I'll use a little bit more current there. It doesn't, there's no clear solution. But when I sit back, I play one game of Dota, and I think when I stare at my death screen, sometimes ideas come to me, and then I'm able to go back into my project once the game is over. So I think that's one way that we can inject chaos. And so that for me is my source of chaos, right? What is your lava lamp? What is it that you're going to use as inspiration for your next solution? And if I were working at 100%, if I were just doing nothing but, the project itself, if I'm doing nothing but staring at like other designs that people have made or ideas that my teammates have come up with, maybe the quality of ideas will not be the same, because they're all going to be drawn from the same pool of ideas, right? We're all just, it's essentially a sort of not ideological, but more of like a conceptual echo chamber where I say, oh yeah, we thought about this idea, and then we just keep talking about that exact same idea, and there's no real innovation. So ultimately what you want to do is you want to pick your battles when you're designing not just your schedule, but generally like your commitments, right? You don't want to be operating at 100%. What are the things that you want to throw off immediately so that you have these expansion gaps for you to wiggle around with, these blocks of empty space for you to play or to rest or recharge, right? For me, Eisenhower Matrix, very standard way of deciding what's important to you. If for those who are not familiar, the Eisenhower Matrix has two axes. One is importance, the other is urgency. You want to throw away things that are not important and not urgent, right? So you get a sensing of like what's important, what's not, and there are different quadrants because there are things that are important but not urgent. These are usually long-term goals that you need to pursue for your general well-being in life, right? Your spiritual well-being in life. Then there are things that are not important but urgent. These tend to be admin matters that you have to do, sadly, and you have to address and service in their own way, but they're not really important to you in the grand scheme of things. And of course, then there are the supremely important ones where they're simultaneously important and urgent. Maybe like you have a project due tomorrow, but you've been sitting on it for a long time, which you really shouldn't do. Those are things that you want to do immediately. Then there are things that are not important, not urgent. Usually these are the kind of things that you want to delegate away or just straight up like cancel on. Right, that way you can look at your schedule, look at your commitments, and you can start axing out for certain things. So you have a little bit more wiggle room, right? And what do you fill that space with? You can fill it with play. You can fill it with self-paced learning, which is something I'm doing. It helps a lot because if it's self-paced, there's no shame in putting it down. Usually for me, this is something that is in service to a long-term but not an important long-term goal. So for me it's something like the ability to coach or the ability to present, right? So I'll read about these. I'll come up with exercises for how to teach people to present, for example. These are things that I work on my so-called free time, this self-paced learning. Yeah. So that's one way, that's one metric, one system you can use to help free up your schedule and your list of commitments. The other, I personally like Jeff Bezos' regret minimization metric, where he thinks about like, when I'm 80 or in 10 years, will this decision matter? Will doing something matter? And that helps a lot in taking you out of the now. Right. Too often, because we are constantly assailed by requests for assistance or demands of service or people are like, hey, can you help me with this? Hey, do you want to do this now? Too often we try to deal with them immediately, that we end up missing the forest for the trees. Right. In the grand scheme of things, we are moving. You want to be moving in some sort of, I would say a sort of grand trajectory. And Jeff Bezos, this tool that he uses helps bring you out of that, and it lifts you above the trees and reminds you that there is a forest. And it asks you, are all these really going to matter 10 years down the line? Right? Will it hurt you if you say no this one time? And will you regret it if you don't take this opportunity up? And for me, that's something that hits really hard because I've kind of gone through my quarter life crisis already, and I can tell that I don't quite think the same as I did 5 years ago, which makes sense because everyone's learning, right? But in the sense of values, in the kinds of values that I hold, what's important to me, they've started to shift because I'm starting to look at the forest instead of the trees. Right? I start to value family more than my own personal enjoyment. I start to be more willing to give up or suffer a little bit for people that matter to me. Maybe some people say hey, that's just because you're in love. That's possible. That's true, right? But it doesn't change the fact that these are things that tend to be associated with the long term, right? Your bonding with your family is more important than the transient joys that you have now. Right, setting up for a future with someone is more important than For example, avoiding frustration about, say, finances at this current point in time, right? All these things, all these current problems, they always seem so big. They're like huge sheets of paper, right? They present themselves to you. They're huge, they're large, they're imposing. But if you look at the side, they're actually just a thin sheet of paper. And they always try to grapple and for your attention, but really, in the grand scheme of things, they're not that significant. They try to present themselves as bigger than they are, because otherwise they wouldn't stand the test of time. Okay, I've said quite a lot of things, I believe. So I think I should wrap it up today for this section of Here's What I'm Thinking About. So a quick recap of what I've covered. The key idea is not to be operating at 100%, so that 1, your schedule has space and time for you to catch opportunities. 2, that you actually do important work. You're not doing this so that you can pretend to be busy. 3, that you're doing things that it forces you to do things that are genuinely important and useful for you. And 4, not being entirely busy, not always operating at 100%, actually lets you perform a little bit better, because then you can start injecting chaos into your unconscious churning of ideas, and it helps you produce higher quality, more innovative ideas, and often that leads to higher productivity. So I hope that this very long audio journal has been somewhat of use to you. Maybe the ideas click with you, maybe they don't. You're most welcome to disagree. But I ultimately hope that today's Here's What I'm Thinking About was something worth thinking about for you, and for myself as well. Yeah. So see you in like 2 weeks, I guess. Bye.